and welcome back to Code Harvest. In this video, we are going to be creating an about page, and we're going to be creating this from scratch. So we're going to be using HTML, a lot of CSS, and we're going to be using a little bit of JavaScript to create some cool effects. And we're going to be including a lot of explanations as to why we are including, each and every CSS property. So this is going to be very beginner friendly. Now, without further ado, let's get started. Alright, so now when we head to our HTML page, first of all, we're going to be starting from scratch completely. So we have our HTML building blocks already set with the doc type. We are going to be using the English language, and inside our head, we are using our style sheet called styles.css, which is in the static folder right here. And we have our folder with our images, our logo, and the images that we're going to be using later on. So now when we check our style sheet, we can see that we have two lines. We start with two lines of importations of font families. Our first one is called Ubuntu, and this one will be mainly used for headers or titles, and it has a font weight range ranging from 300 until 700. And for pop-ins, we're going to be using for more paragraphs or text, short text, or mainly more long text, and it has a font weight ranging from 100 until 900. And now when we start, we can see that we have a selector used, and this asterisk basically means select all elements. So this selector selects all elements, and it ensures that each element has a margin of 0 pixels, a padding of 0 pixels, and a font family of Ubuntu. So that Ubuntu is our main font that we're going to be using. So what does margin mean? Margin is basically the spacing that is found outside an element, and a padding is basically spacing that is inside an element. So margin outside an element and padding spacing inside an element. So they're both spacings. Now we're going to be starting with creating our banner rather than our navigation bar. So now let's create an ID, and we're going to call this ID about page banner. Alright, so now let us actually style our about page banner. So what we want to do is we want to specify the width and the height that it's going to be having, and we're also going to be designing, creating a little radius or round or circular effect, whatever you'd like to call it. And we're also going to be adding a background image, and we're going to be adding properties that will ensure that the image fits perfectly inside the banner. Alright, so now we have already defined the width and the height of our banner, and we have also included a border radius in the left and in the bottom right of our banner, making it look modern and more rounded. So this too creates a round effect. And if we wanted to increase it to perhaps, let's say 100, maybe on the left side, it will create that effect. Alright, so we also added our background image that we wanted to include, and we also included background size. So all these three basically ensure that the image fits perfectly. Now the image that I've used is very, very large. So I have used background size in order to resize the image to make sure that it covers the whole banner, the banner's dimensions, which is the width and the height. And we've also positioned the image to make sure that it is leaning towards the bottom side. So when we expand our page, we can see more of the bottom side of our image. Another thing is we also made sure that we included the background attachment fixed property. So this basically creates the parallax scrolling effect. So when we scroll down, the image stays fixed. So it basically creates a parallax scrolling effect. And we also included overflow hidden in order to hide the contents that we're going to be adding very shortly. So we're going to be adding a gradient. So basically a layer. It's going to be black but transparent, slightly transparent. And since in order to avoid repeating this in the layer itself, so it's going to be on top of the banner, and in order to avoid repeating this in the gradient banner, we're just going to say, well, anything that overflows the banner should be hidden. Alright, so now we have already included the CSS properties and designed our banner. So we have created the background color, and we have reduced the background color to something more lighter. So we reduced the opacity. So for example, this is basically a black background, but we could reduce the opacity just so we can see the image, so it kind of looks more classic. Now we also made sure that we set width and height to 100% just so it could fit the full width and the full height of the banner, so the full dimensions of the banner. And we also set the banner to a flex layout, since in this since this is going to act as a container for the items of the title, which is going to say about us and excellent quality furniture. So we used justify content center, which basically centers the items, which will center the items, the texts, the about us, the heading, as well as the subtitle horizontally centered. And the place items is going to position the items vertically center. Alright, so now let's create another ID, and we're going to be calling this ID about content banner. Alright, so now that we're done with the gradient or the opacity banner, so now we are going to be creating our content, and this is going to include our heading H1 and our second heading H2, which will have the subtitle. Alright, so now we are going to be working on our first and second heading designs, but first we want to make sure that actually our content is centered, is aligned to the center. So we have to use text align for this. So first we're going to be using this to create our layout. Alright, so now we have aligned our text, and we also, well, this is optional. This is just optional and based on how you want your banner to look like. So basically I feel like it looks a little too high, so I basically put it lower by using margin top 20 pixels. Also, another way to bring it lower is by using position relative and only position relative, and then using top, and we'll use the same amount of pixels, which is top, which is 20 pixels. Yeah, so that also works too, but because for margin top you only get to use one line, we're gonna use that one instead. Alright, so now let us design our first and our second heading. So all we need to do is, since they're both child elements of about banner content, so basically a child element is any element that is directly after the parent element. So the parent element of about banner content, for example, is about gradient banner, and the child element for a banner content are H1 and H2. So we're just going to take that and specify the elements that we want to select, which is H1, and we'll also do the same for H2. Alright, so now as you can see for the H1, both of these headings will have the color white, and it is always important to use the American spelling of color, because British does not work. So it's always important to keep aware of the syntax or the spelling that you're going to be using, since syntax really matters. However, if you want to capitalize, color, it's alright, because it still works as long as the spelling is correct. Now we also used a font weight of 500. So remember, again, font weight basically defines how bold a text is. So for example, we are using Ubuntu at the moment, since it is a heading, so it has a font weight of from 300, 400, 500, and 700. So this basically, if the higher the font weight, the more bolder it will be. So we used something that is more in between, but slightly more bolder to create that heading effect. And we also made sure that it was really large as the font size. So now let's work on heading 2. Alright, so for heading 2, we used the same color. We slightly reduced the font weight so it's a little less bolder, and we also reduced the font size. We also made sure that we maintained spacing between the heading 1 and heading 2, and we also used this new one called WebKit font smoothing, and we set the value to anti-aliased. So this basically smoothens or makes the fonts smoother, it makes letters smoother. So basically that is what defines anti-aliased. I'm not sure how to pronounce it properly, but what it basically does is it softens lines, and in this case it softens the lining of the letters. Alright, so for example, if we remove this completely, it would look a little too bold. So basically I would have just reduced this to 300 if I wanted to, but I thought that it was a little too thin, and so I wanted something that was between font weight 300 and 400. So the solution was to add a font smoothing property. Alright, so now we're going to be working on our navigation bar. So we're going to head over to our HTML page, and here we're just going to create a nav tag element. Alright, so this is going to be our container, so our navigation container. Now I'm going to create another div in which we're going to call our ID about page so that's the name of our page, and nav bar, short for navigation bar. So this is going to be used as another container that will be used to design. So this nav element is going to be used for the positioning and for the dimensions of the navigation bar, and this is going to be used to design the navigation bar. So for this navigation bar, we're going to be having two sides. One side will have the image and the other side will have the navigation links. So for example, home, about, products, services. So there'll be two child elements of the about page nav bar. Alright, so now as you can see, we have set our image and we have included our source, and so this is our file path as to where our image is, which is right here. And as you can see, we have two logos. So we're going to be creating this navigation effect where when the user just enters the page the first time without scrolling, the navigation bar will have a transparent background, so the logo will be white. However, when the user starts to scroll down, the background color of the navigation bar should change to to white. So hence the logo should turn black, and the navigation links color will also change. So we'll be using JavaScript for that later on very soon. Alright, so closing this editor here. So since we've already added our file path, we have also added an alternative. So for example, if the image has not yet loaded or something has gone wrong, we want to let the user know that there was supposed to be an image loaded there or presented there, but something went wrong, so this text will appear in its place. And we've also defined the width and the height of our logo. Alright, so now over here we have created an ID which we have called about page nav text, in which we will include basically how it's positioned, and we have also included an unordered list. So there are two types of lists, ordered lists and unordered lists, and so inside this unordered list we have included 4 lists. Each of them have a anchor tag, which basically is a link which leads you to where the file path defined here will redirect you to. But since this is just for demonstration, we put a hashtag there since we're just using this for demonstration. But for example, if you wanted it to be in the index.html page, then for example for home we could put index.html. So now let's go ahead and design the navigation element, the about page nav bar, and as well as the page nav text. Alright, so when we scroll up, we have done designing everything in the nav element. So to explain, starting with the nav element, we have kept the nav element with the full width of the screen, so it takes up the full length of the screen. We have also kept the nav element to a fixed position, so even while we're scrolling down, the navigation bar will stay the same. So for example, if we remove that, and if we since we do not have any content there yet, let's add that manually. So right after the banner, we just want to create a random div. This is just for demonstration, and we can say we want a margin top of 1000 pixels, and then something like about us as the text. Okay, so now we're able to scroll down. So as you can see, the navigation bar stays on top. So again, that was just for demonstration, so let's get rid of that. Now another thing is we also kept the z-index to a very high value. So what is a z-index? A z-index is basically something that defines the layer order or the stacking order of elements based on its position in the HTML document. So for example, here usually in a HTML document, usually the elements that are defined on top, so for example the nav bar itself, which is on top, are stacked behind, whereas the elements that are usually introduced later on, so for example the banner, is usually the elements that it is in front. So we obviously want the navigation bar to be in front instead. Okay, so for example, if we had an image and if we had a line of text, we want the image to be in front of the image. We want the text to be in front of the image. So therefore, we should first define the image, and we should first declare and define the image and then introduce the text. Otherwise, if it was vice versa, the text would be behind the image and would not be displayed. So we set it to a high value since we're also going to be using images and text below, and we cannot keep track of what the stacking order level is, and we want to make sure that the navigation bar is always in front of each element, no matter what it is, whether it is an image or a text. It must be in front. So that's why we kept it at a high value. Otherwise, we could have kept it at the value of number 1. Because mostly the elements are by default kept at the index of value 0, really. Now, next one is our navigation bar, which is used to decorate our navigation bar. So here we just used the flex layer as well in order to center all of our elements. So by elements, we mean our child elements. So just our child elements, the image, as well as the unordered list. And we made sure that it was positioned to the center horizontally and vertically. And we use a transparent background. And since we wanted to keep a width of about 80%, and also I feel like the nav bar should not be centered, but I feel like there should be space between, rather, since there are only 2 elements and we want to create a space between. So that's better. So when we expand this, it looks much better. And we've also kept a width of 80%, and because of that, it will cause the navigation bar to be aligned to the left hand side. So for example, if we remove margin auto, it is moved to the left side. So we needed margin auto in order to center the navigation bar. And what margin auto does is it centers elements horizontally, and it basically calculates the amount of pixels needed in order to create an equal distribution of spacing between the left and the right of an element. So not top and bottom, but just left and right. And then we kept a padding of 15 pixels. Now, I feel like we should reduce this to maybe 8 pixels, because later on we're going to be using the other navigation bar. We're going to be changing it to a white color, and we wouldn't like the padding to look too big or the spacing to be too much. Okay, so another thing is we also created the unordered list. So inside the unordered list, we wanted all elements to be in one row, so we use display flex. Otherwise, if we remove that, it would all be in a column. And another thing is we wanted okay, so another thing is we did not want any bullet points, as when we get rid of that, it has bullet points by default. So we decided to get rid of that by setting it to none. And last but not least, we also defined and set the properties and styling for our text, so the list itself. And as you can see, there's a hovering effect as well. So we set the color to white, a little bit bold, and to have a font size of 18 pixels. We also wanted a lot of spacing between each navigation link. And since this is actually a link, we decided to remove any decoration. So we did remove the underline, because by default there's always an underline in the links. So we decided to get rid of that. And we also used a font smoothing, so the same thing as the one we used for heading 2. And last but not least, we also created a smooth transition of just 0.3 seconds. So, okay, my bad, I forgot to put seconds. So 0.3 seconds, let's put it back to 0.3, and now there is, okay, actually let's put it back to 0.5. I think that would be better. So now that looks much better, and it creates a very smooth effect. Alright, so now we also we were able to make this hovering effect possible by adding a colon and applying the syntax hover. So this allowed the hovering effect to occur, where the color changes from white to yellow. Alright, so now let us create the JavaScript effect. So when we scroll down the navigation bars, our background color should change. So we should do that by starting by creating a script tag. Okay, and right here we're just going to create a new add event listener, and we're going to specify an attribute called DOM content loaded. So basically we want all of the elements from top to bottom, so the whole document elements, to be processed and loaded before the function can be carried out. Alright, so we have used DOM content loaded. So once all of the elements are loaded, then we want the function to carry out. So we have used an arrow function. There's also another way, which is by using function brackets, but since we're not adding any attribute, I feel like and we're not even using the keyword this, which is usually commonly used in jQuery, we're just going to use a arrow function. So now we're going to create another add event listener, and since and we need to be able to, we need the document to be able to listen to whether a user is scrolling down. Alright, so now we've added another event listener, and this is just used to listen to whether the user has scrolled down, and if that is detected, then we're going to use this arrow function once again, and we should carry out this function. So inside this function we should define a few variables. So we want to collect and select the navigation bar, so we need to get the nav element right here. And we also want, remember, we also wanted the logo image to change from white to black, as a white logo in a white background color wouldn't be visible basically. So a black one would fit. And we also need to collect the navigation links. So basically we need to get about page nav text A. Alright, so if you've noticed, we have used camel case lettering. So basically, unlike HTML and CSS, we're able to use like small lettering with dashes in order to separate words. But for a JavaScript, we're not able to add dashes, as that would create an error, as you can see a red line underneath. So we're using camel casing, which basically means when you want to separate between different words, the first word should have, or the first letter should have a small letter, should start with a small letter case, and then the next word or the next letter that you want to add should start with a large letter, and then the other following words. So for example, camel case, the word itself, so camel and case are two words, but the first word should have small letter case, and then the second should start with a big letter, and it can continue. For example, if I want to say camel case link, then the next one should also have a capital letter. So only the first word should start with a small letter, if that makes sense. Alright, so we have already defined the variables that we're going to be using. So the first one is obviously navbar. So inside the document, we want to select anything that is a nav element. And since there's only one, we just use query selector rather than query selector all. So we use this to collect one item. So for logo image, the same thing, but for nav links, we have used query selector all because we want to select a node of lists, a node of these links, so a list of all of the links. So since we cannot use query selector, since it's only used to collect one item, we need to use query selector all, which makes it much easier for us. And also, as you may have noticed, this is usually seen when in CSS when you're selecting an item, so you can define its CSS properties and style it. We also do the same thing for JavaScript. Alright, so now we need to create an if statement to check whether the user so we've already added an event listener to check if the user is scrolling. So now we need to create an if statement to check whether that Y position, so the position of the page, is maybe at 0. So if it is at 0, then the background color should stay transparent. However, when the user starts scrolling and the Y position changes, then then the background color needs to turn white. So we're going to say if window.scroll Y. So we're going to use window because window is basically just the screen. So if the window or the screen is changing and is at scroll Y, maybe the value is, for example, 0, then the background color should stay transparent. So scroll Y is to see the Y position of the page. The Y position of the window. Alright, so as you can see, we have already completed our if statement. So if the screen or the windows scroll Y, so if the Y position is greater than 0, the Y position of the window or screen is greater than 0, then the background color should be white. Otherwise, if the user has scrolled up or if the user has just entered the website, but this is more effective when the user is scrolling up, as by default the background color is already transparent. So this more applies when the user is scrolling up. So when the user is scrolling up and the Y position hits at 0 of the window or the screen, then the background color should reverse and go back to being transparent. So in order to call out the background color and change the background color or modify it, then we should call out background color dot style to know, so that it knows that we want the CSS property to change. And in order to call out the background to change background color, then we use the camel case of background color. We also used it to get a box shadow. Now box shadow is not really, there is no attribute for box shadow without the brackets, without the square brackets and the apostrophe. So we needed to use it inside a bracket and apostrophe. But this is optional, by the way. This is very optional. This is just to create a 3D effect of the background of the navigation bar. So for example, if I go back and I put the demo again, so we want the spacing once again to be 1000 pixels, which is quite a lot, and the text is about us. And if we reload this and we try to scroll down, we can see that we can see that the background color changes, and we can see that it has a little bit of a 3D shadow effect, and that's what we want. Also, we also need to create a smooth transition. So a smooth transition from the background color being transparent to white, just like we did for the links. So we can go back and we can go back to the nav element right here and include the property transition. And now we will not forget to put seconds like last time. I think we should make it more smoother by increasing the amount of seconds, and we want it to be when the color changes from transparent, the original color, to white, and vice versa. So we need to use in and out. Okay, so now when we scroll down, we can see the beautiful transition happening. All right, now next we also needed to change the source of the image. So we just used source attribute, which was very simple, and we changed the file path. So now we're going to create our for loop statement, where we basically go through all of the links in lavlink, so all of the anchor tags. Alright, so now as you can see, we have already included or created our for loop. So okay, so I'm very used to putting the variable that goes through the list as I, but just for better readability, we're just gonna call it link. So yeah, okay, so when link is 0, so basically the loop goes through the number of A's based on the amount that is inside navlinks. So navlinks, the length of navlinks is 1, 2, 3, 4. So that means the length is 4, but every element in an array or a node starts at 0. So home is going to be position 0, position 1, position 2, and position 3. So link cannot, so there's no 4, so link should be less than 4. So while link is less than 4, so 0, 1, 2, 3, then continue the process of adding up link and changing its color and processing this statement. So obviously we have used the array and then took the current position that it is in, and for each of them we want to change the style color to be what we have defined in our statements here and right here. So I believe we are done. So when we reload this and when we scroll down, we can see that the navlink's color change, and oh my bad, this needs to be white. I actually just copied everything and pasted there, but yeah, so now it should be better. So when we scroll down and we scroll up, it turns white, black, and now it is perfect. Alright, so now we are going to move on to our next section, which is creating our about page content. So we're going to start by creating a new div, and we're going to call its ID about page content. Alright, so in here we're going to be having 3 sections. So about page contact will have 3 direct children. One will be called about section 1, about section 2, and about section 3. So for the first section, we're going to include a title called Who We Are and a little bit of text, and we're going to be centering this text to the center. So everything will be in the center, all of its elements of about section 1. Alright, and now for our about section 1, we are going to be adding 3 elements. Alright, so when we check our page, we can see the text there, but we have not added the design for the divider that we're going to be having called borderline. But we're going to be adding the text first, and then we'll work on the CSS properties. Alright, so let us get rid of this. So now we can see we have included our text. So now we are going to be working on our design in our CSS file. So first of all, we want a little gap between the banner and the title itself. So we're going to be adding margin top. So we're going to select the class who about section heading. Sorry, we're going to start by selecting about page content. Okay, so now we can see when we have added margin top, so spacing top on the about page content container, there it provides spacing. Alright, so now we are going to be working on our first section, which is called about section 1. So we're going to be selecting it as an ID. And basically what we want to do is add a little bit of padding and reduce the width so it won't be 100%, and we want to make sure that all of the elements in about section 1 are centered, are positioned to the center. Alright, so as you can see, we have added a little bit of spacing within the element, and we've also reduced the width in order to make a more simple or elegant classic look. We have also included, and we needed to include margin and to set it to auto, since actually this property centers the section, so not really the elements inside but just the whole section altogether. Then we use display flex, justify content, and place items in order to center all of the elements inside. So who we are, the text and everything, horizontally and vertically centered. And we also needed to use flex direction column, since we don't want everything to be in one line, since usually when we use a flex layout, the default value of flex direction is row, but we do not want that. We want it to be to each have their own line. Alright, so now we are going to be designing the heading, which is about section heading. And in order to, and since we're going to be using a class, since we're also going to be using it for about section 2 and about section 3, in order to select the class, we use a dot and then add in the class name. And for this, we're just going to add a font color of something like very dark but not black. And we're also going to be defining its font size, which is going to be slightly much bigger than it currently is. And we're going to decrease the font weight to about 500. Alright, and now we're going to be designing our borderline, or basically the divider. So it's going to be dividing, or going to be between the heading and the about text. Okay, so now we are done with the borderline, and as you can see, we've added the line of 2 pixels. We have defined the width that we wanted, which was 100 pixels, and we added a little bit of border radius, so we made it a little more round so that we could create this softer look and more modern look appeal. Then we've added spacing on top and bottom, and now the last thing we're going to be designing in the about section 1, or the first section, is about text. Alright, so now we are done with designing our about text. So as you can see, we have created it to be a little bit lighter, so we have lightened up the text so that we could create a more a less dense but a more soft and modern appeal once again. And we've used a different font family, which is Poppins. So Poppins fit best for about text, and since it came from a source online, we needed to add an apostrophe. Alright, so now we're done with the first section, so we're going to be moving on to our second section, and it's going to be very similar to section 1. It's going to have 3 elements. It's going to have a header, it's going to have a borderline, and it's also going to have a text. However, the layout and the styling is going to be slightly different. So now let's add our elements. Alright, so now we have added our text area, so it's quite similar, but the text will be aligned to the center, to the left rather than the center. Now so about section 2 has two sections itself. It has the text section and it has the image section. So now we're going to be adding our container for the image. Alright, so now we have added our text and our image as well. So obviously the image is too big and this does not look laid out well. So now we're going to be working on our CSS properties, and we're going to be starting with the About Section 2 properties. Alright, so as you can see, when we scroll down, we can see that our elements are centered, and well, they do not have space between yet, but they're in one line, which is what we wanted. We didn't want it to be in a flex direction of a column, so we added space between. Now because the image is too large and it has even created a scroll bar, we are going to change that right now. But once we adjust this image to an appropriate amount, we should see a space between these two elements, since the direct children of About Section 2 are About Section 2 text and About Section 2 image, so it will only directly affect the text and the image and not the properties, or the elements inside each of the child elements. So, and we've also added once again, we have adjusted the width to be about 90%, so something lower than 100% will cause the the element or the container to not be horizontally centered, so we needed to add margin to automatic, or set margin to automatic. So now we are going to be working on About Section 2 text, and that is also an ID, so we're going to be using a hashtag for that. Alright, so basically I've added a little bit of padding in order to make sure that it does not look crowded. So I added a lot of padding spacing, which is spacing inside the element, and we have also adjusted the width, so 50% of About Section 2 should consist of the text and the other 50% of the image, and we made sure that the text would be aligned to the left side. And now we're going to be working on our image. Alright, so now we are done with designing and laying out our image container as well as the image itself. So we added slight spacing. This is optional. We just wanted to make sure that the image would not be too high, to be lowered down slightly. We've also made sure that the image was aligned to the center of the page. And so since we as well added a width of 50% for the image, and since we reduced the width, we also needed to make sure if we did not add margin auto, it would be aligned to the left, so we made sure that it was automatically centered horizontally. And we also added slight padding as well. Now obviously it does not look good here, but if we use media queries, which will be in the next video, just do comment down below if you want to see a video of where I make the about page more responsive to other screens. Then I will make that video, and we're going to be using media queries in order to fix this. But since this video is more focused on desktop screens, when we expand our screen, we can see that it looks aesthetically pleasing and modern appealing. And we also added a border radius of 20 pixels in order to create some rounded corner of our image to make it look modern once again. Alright, so now we are going to be working on our third section, as the second section is done. So we're going to be adding our elements, starting with our heading, which will inherit the same class as the ones we used for section 1 and section 2, About Section heading. Alright, so now as you can see, when we look to our page, we can see that we have our images set, our name, the founder's name and the founder's position. However, as you can see, our images look too large, our text does not look right, and we want each profile to be inside a circle. So we're going to be designing this in our CSS in our CSS file by starting with section 3. So we'll start with the sections container. Alright, so now when we look to our page, we can see that everything is finally centered. So all of our texts, all of our subtitles, our titles, our images, our positions, and everything. So we've used text align, and we've also added a margin top in order to create a spacing between the second section and the third section. And we've added a little bit of padding of 20 pixels inside the container. Alright, so now we're going to be working on our subtitle or second heading. So we're going to select so it is a H2 element. So all we need to do to specify this is to call out the ID, the name of the section, and we're just going to say heading 2. Alright, so as you can see, now it looks a little more elegant or classic or modern, whatever you would like to call it. So we've added our second heading styling. So we've reduced the font size much smaller than the first heading that we used, and we also used the font style called italic. So all we needed to do was type in font style italic. Then we also made our text lighter in order to create an appealing visual and in order to make it more appealing. And we also added some spacing on top between the first heading and our second heading, and we made sure that our font weight that it looked a little less bolder. So now we're going to be working on our About Founders container, so where the images and the text is at. Alright, so now we're done with our container. So we basically added a Plex layout so that we could put everything in one line, and we made sure that it was justified horizontally to the center of the page, and it would be directed in one line rather than each item to its own line, but everything in one line. So now we're going to be working on our box properties, and in this case it is a class. Alright, so now we've added a spacing. So each of the items in the About Founders container About Founders box is basically an item. So each of these items have a spacing inside of 30 pixels and a spacing outside of 20 pixels. And obviously this is optional, so change it as you please. So now we're going to be working on our shape, and we're going to be working on making this more circular to make sure that the image can fit inside and to make sure that any overflow is hidden. Alright, so now as you can see, each of the items have a circular shape, and that is because we added border radius, and usually we always use border radius to create corners, such as for our banner and for our image down here. Now in order to create a circular effect, we needed to set it to 50%, and anything that is 50%, if you set the border radius to 50% or even greater than that, it always creates a circle. Now we also made sure that any overflow would be hidden, so it basically caused all of these images to squeeze. So now some of them looks very stretched, and all of them actually look very stretched. So we're going to be fixing that very soon. And we also added some box shadow. So if you can see, there's a slight shadow in the circles, outside of the circles, and this is to create a smooth 3D effect to make it more visually appealing. Now we're going to be using two properties. So the first one, we're going to be using object fit, and we want the image to be covered properly. So now the image is adjusted, and that is perfect. So now the image fits well into the shape. And another thing is we're going to be adding object position. So you want to position the images towards the center. However, this is going to change as some of these images need to be placed to the to the top. For example, this one looks a little too below, this one looks a little too much to the right, this one looks sort of fine, but I think it should move towards to the right as well. So I feel like this is not really necessary, and since we have to edit each and every one of them individually, we're going to be working on it in the HTML page. Alright, so actually I meant for this image to be in the middle, since Amanda Will seems more like a British or European name, and it seems to fit her. So I'm going to be changing the image position. So this one should be 3 and this one should be 2. Alright, so now here we're going to be styling our the position of our images, since they do not look like they fit very well, and we need it to be perfect. So for the first one, it looks like it needs to move to the right, so we're going to say position the image towards the right side. And wow, that looks much better, and it looks like it's at the center. So now we're going to copy this and do the same thing. Also, this one looks like it needs to move towards the right, so I'll copy that there. And for this one, it looks like it needs to move towards the top, as it looks a little low, so I'll say top. And now they look really perfect. So now the only thing that we need to do is edit our text. Alright, so now we're going to be working on our text. So we're going to be selecting this class first, and then we'll work on name and position afterwards. Alright, so now we're going to be moving on to our name, about founder's name. So here we're going to edit name. Alright, so all we added was a little bit of a bigger font size, and we made sure that it looked a little more bolder, and we also added a little spacing between the text itself and the circle or the profile. So now we're going to be working on position. Alright, so now as you can see, we have also added a font size but much lower than the name, and we added a slightly lower bolder effect. We also added an italic font style since we wanted to look more visual appealing as well and more professional. And we also added a little spacing on top between the name and the position itself.